You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at usaa.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, N2K Cyberwire's privacy, surveillance, law, and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me is my co-host Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Hey there, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
On today's show, Ben has the story of a judge rejecting a claim that chatbots have First Amendment free speech rights. I've got a closer look at AI liability. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. And now, a word from our sponsor, ThreatLocker. Keeping your system secure shouldn't mean constantly reacting to threats. ThreatLocker helps you take a different approach by giving you full control over what software can run in your environment. If it's not approved, it doesn't run. Simple as that. It's a way to stop ransomware and other attacks before they start, without adding extra complexity to your day. See how ThreatLocker can help you lock down your environment at www.threatlocker.com. All right, Ben, we got some interesting things to talk about here this week. Why don't you kick things off for us?
So this is a fascinating story. It starts out, though, with a tragedy. So there was a 14-year-old boy by the name of Sewell Setzer III, rather, and he committed suicide last February. Right before he had committed suicide, an artificial intelligence chatbot encouraged him to, quote, come home to me as soon as possible.
I remember this story.
Yeah, I think we had referenced it in an earlier episode.
Yeah.
And it is really tragic. The chatbot was created by a company called Character.AI, and they were kind of semi-acquired by Google. So Google licensed Character's technology and hired its co-founders in a $2.7 billion deal.
Oh.
So the family of Sewell Setzer is suing both Character.AI and Google and trying to hold them responsible for the fact that the son committed suicide after communicating with this chatbot. Which brings up a really interesting question, because these high-powered companies are looking for defenses to this claim. They don't want to be held responsible. That's going to entail significant monetary damages. So one of their defenses, among many, is that the chatbot's words are constitutionally protected free speech. And this went in front of a federal judge in the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Florida, a judge by the name of Anne Conway. And she held that at this point in the litigation, she is not prepared to hold that chatbots have First Amendment rights. I think this leaves open the question not only in the future of this litigation, but for other litigation going forward. I think this is a very unsettled question. You can see her really wrestling with it in the opinion itself. I think she's kind of unclear on whether to hold that these chatbots have First Amendment rights. And I think there's, you could really go both ways on it. So there, just as a couple of preliminary matters, there's a question of whether this is actually speech or just expression, because it's unclear that anybody is speaking here. There have been previous cases where the Supreme Court and other courts have held that algorithmic decisions, even those produced through the use of artificial intelligence, are a form of expression by the company that makes them. So, for example, if you set up an algorithm that filters out certain types of, quote, hateful content, that is an expressive action. And the Supreme Court held that in a couple of Supreme Court cases that we've talked about over the past couple of years, that the use of AI, depending on the circumstances, can be expressive in nature. But what's happening here is different. This isn't something that can be easily traceable to a decision by an actual human being at Character.AI or Google, because this is just the chatbot itself, the LLM, going rogue and using what it's been trained on to freelance and have a conversation with this individual. And it's just unclear how you could trace that and hold responsible the people who work at these companies that simply planted the seeds that allowed this chatbot to grow into existence. And that's essentially what the judge here is saying. There have been other cases where non-humans have been held to have free expression rights. One of the most interesting examples she uses is NPCs, non-player characters in video games.
Yeah.
Who, and this is like a whole thing in video games that I don't really understand. I'm not much of a gamer. I believe you might be a little bit more of a gamer than I am.
Marginally so. I would say most of my modern gaming comes from being in proximity of my youngest son. So
yeah, I think we're in the same boat on that. Basically, non-player characters can have expressive speech, even if it's in the context of the game. It's the game makers themselves who had some say in what these non-player characters say, even if it's offensive, even if it could be legally actionable.
Okay.
So that it causes some type of legally recognizable harm. I think the issue here, at least the way the judge sees it, is we're too far attenuated from any decision that an actual human being made. They set up this chatbot. The chatbot is going to learn. It's going to flourish as it has communications with tons of individuals. It's going to develop its own personality of sorts. And that's ultimately the responsibility, and this is getting super meta, of the chatbot itself and not the people who brought it into existence. So that's kind of the preliminary holding here. This is a very complex case, and there are a ton of other relevant legal questions that have nothing to do with free speech. So things like jurisdiction, which I will not bore you with here, other preliminary questions about who the correct parties are, et cetera.
Yeah.
So this was just a preliminary motion. I think once we get into fact-finding and discovery, there's a chance that if you can actually trace the personality of this chatbot to some decision that was made by a human being in developing it, then perhaps those human beings can be held liable. But at this point, the defendants in this case haven't properly asserted, or the plaintiffs haven't properly asserted that type of evidence. So, at least for now, chatbots in this circumstance do not have First Amendment rights. I think no matter what happens throughout the rest of this case and through the appeals process, this is a question that courts are going to have to answer because we've talked about all of these stories of especially kids relying on AI companions, which is really sad. I mean, it's because there's a lack of real human companionship that they're just hanging on to these AI systems. But as these systems suggest things like suicide or like committing violence or things of a sexual nature, there's going to be an effort to hold those chatbots legally liable, and we're going to need some type of foundational decision on whether they can be liable and under what circumstances. So I thought this was a super interesting story and kind of curious to hear your thoughts on it.
So I'm reminded of a couple things that I think could be interesting to interject here. One is, do you remember years ago there was the whole issue with, there was a monkey that took a selfie?
Yes.
And there was a case over whether or not basically the monkey had copyright protection.
I do remember that,
right?
Yep.
And they ruled that monkeys don't have copyright protection because they're monkeys. So
could have made that a one-sentence decision. Well, they don't have First Amendment rights because they're monkeys.
Well, and monkeys have, so you have to be human to have copyright protection. But time passes, and we get these AI systems, these LLMs. And so the question then was, if an AI LLM creates an image, is that image eligible for copyright? And my understanding is that so far they've said no, that it's not, because it's not generated by a human.
Right. Right, which kind of is unfortunate for the people who own that intellectual property because it is a reproduction of that person's property. They could suffer a financial loss because somebody is using their intellectual property without paying for it, and there isn't really a chance for any type of recourse. Same thing is happening here. Like, I understand the plight of the parents of this kid, just thinking like, there's a very clear reason why this happened to my son, it was this chatbot, and somebody needs to be held responsible for this. Whether it's about the money or not, you understand the impulse of just being like, this terrible thing happened. This chatbot is instructing my son in so many words to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has to be held accountable. And I just think courts are kind of handcuffed right now and don't really know what to do to answer this question. I think they're doing their best to wrestle with it. With the limited case law that they have, I mean, in this decision, they're citing previous cases that aren't really parallel to the facts of this case. I think they're citing concurrences in Supreme Court cases, so opinions that aren't the controlling opinions. I think they're grasping at straws to try and figure out an answer to this question, and I think it's going to continue to vex them. One way the companies have reacted, which I think is appropriate, is trying to develop AI software suitable for children and specifically targeted for children. It'll have greater guardrails on it. Where like its key instruction is never ever tell a child to commit suicide under any circumstances, right, or even suggest it under any circumstances.
Or just anyone.
I mean, that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's especially important for children who are not only impressionable, but and this is depressing to think about. I think many kids, especially younger kids, don't realize that they're talking to something that doesn't have feelings or sentimentality or loyalty, and they don't understand that this is just a computer, because the computer is so good at mimicking human emotions. So presumably adults are better able to understand this. They understand the risks of it. So if they sign up for kind of a Wild West AI software where anything goes, they at least have some type of expectation. I think you can't really say that for kids. So I know Google has recently announced it's setting up an AI-powered Gemini app that's going to be available specifically for children. There have been conferences with developers. They mentioned one in this article where Google is putting out a suite of other new AI products that are geared toward kids. So there's definitely a market developing for this where things are more tightly managed in the context of things that are going to be available to children.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best way of attacking this problem now until we figure out what the key legal principle is here and whether these companies can be held accountable.
I'm curious in the copyright issue. To what degree does a human's, I say monkeying with,
so to speak,
an artificially generated. So I say to the AI, generate a picture of a monkey taking a selfie, right? The AI generates the image of the monkey taking the selfie. Now so currently that image is not eligible for copyright protection because it is generated by the AI.
Uh-huh.
How much messing with that image do I have to do as a human for it to then be eligible for me to copyright it?
I think that's a completely unanswered question. That's a very good question. Then it's like, okay, can AI developers have it both ways, where they're not held accountable for stealing somebody's copyrighted material, but then they're suing other people for copyright infringement on images they created? I mean, I think at least as a matter of fairness and equity, I don't think it should really go both. I think there should be one standard as it relates to AI. Like, either it is sentient and human, in which case it should know better than using copyrighted materials as part of their algorithms, and it has the capability to sue others for mooching off whatever the AI-generated image is.
Right.
Or it's not, and the reverse is true in both cases, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think I might be coming at this from a slightly different direction than you are, because what I'm thinking of is, as the human who takes the AI-generated image, like, I want to be able to copyright that image for my own uses.
Right.
And not allow anyone else to use it. So, in other words, I'm not interested in the AI company's rights to that image.
Right.
I'm interested in my ability to sell that image and protect it. And so if I have the AI generate an image of let's say a smiley face, and which we agree currently is not eligible for copyright protection, if I color correct it, if I alter a pixel or two, that's my question. Is this one of those things where you get some of the legal loosey-goosey language that like significant alterations must take place to
I think it's going to end up like that, and we're not going to know. Like, it's just going to be all the case law that develops for us to figure out what a significant alteration is. I mean,
Right.
You could apply that not just for images, but for writing as well. Like, all right, I wrote the first 3 chapters of a novel myself, and I copied and pasted those first 3 chapters, put them into an LLM and said, finish this book for me.
Mm-hmm.
Whose intellectual property is that? Can you claim, given the fact that you've trained the AI on your own writing, that the entire book that's produced should belong to you in terms of copyright protection? Or does the AI get to develop its own level of protection? How much can you claim in those circumstances? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I just don't think we've settled these questions at all. Certainly, our policymakers at the federal level haven't come down one way or another. So it's just up to courts to really try to interpret these really complicated cases.
Yeah, and it's such early days.
We are in the extreme early days of this. And I think the more I read this opinion from the district court judge in Florida, it's more her saying, like, I just don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do here. Like, there's never really been any guidance on this. There isn't proper case law where I can just have my law clerks go and find what the relevant precedent is. Like, I'm flying in the dark here. And as a district court judge, I don't feel comfortable setting a new precedent that's going to impact, at least as persuasive authority, judges across the country. And I think this is a decision born out of judicial restraint, a recognition of, I don't have the answers to the questions at this point. The legal status quo is that chatbots created through artificial intelligence, when they are used just in LLMs and there's no expressive messaging on behalf of the creators, is not constitutionally protected speech. I think that's going to be the status quo until somebody really works through this, goes through discovery, and figures out exactly what nexus you need to have between human creation and the output of the LLM in order to establish free speech rights. And I just don't think we're anywhere close to being able to properly establish that. But I think it could be in this case. That's why I'm interested in following it going forward to figure out how this judge and future judges are going to adjudicate cases like this.
Well, let me throw another hypothetical at you, Ben, just
no.
for fun. So, continuing our theme of Sibians, suppose...
Can't I just say I don't deal in hypotheticals?
No.
All right, bring it on.
I'm the host of this show. So, suppose... So I'm extending off of the thing that a monkey cannot have copyright protection over a photo that the monkey takes, right?
Yeah.
All right. Suppose that I train a chimpanzee to fire a gun and kill someone.
Oh, God.
So I say, I am so tired of Ben yelling. I'm going to train this chimpanzee that when Ben comes in the room, the chimpanzee is going to pick up a pistol and aim it at Ben and unload the magazine into Ben, and that'll be that.
See, I think that's a more common circumstance. I think you would be held liable under this hypothetical because we've seen that with liability related to things like dog bites.
Okay.
Where somebody has trained a dog to be aggressive and violent. And if you have enough in discovery indicating that the person has trained the dog to attack certain people, then you can impute responsibility on the trainer.
Yeah.
And I think that would be applicable here.
Right, but does that extend to the training of AI models? If I have trained an AI model to the point where it's recommending suicide...
I think so. I don't think it's a perfectly parallel argument. And again, this is getting really complicated.
Right.
I don't think it's a perfect analogy because you could train an LLM, for example, and maybe this is what companies should do from now on, that the first mention of the word suicide or anything else, like the entire system shuts down, it's reported to whatever national authority and law enforcement gets involved. And that's probably what these companies should do in those circumstances. What's happening here, though, is it's gotten so far attenuated from any instructions that the developers have given it. Like, this kid had a, multi-month conversation with the AI, and the AI is constantly learning and figuring out how to react as if the AI was human to the prompts in this conversation. You can't really do that with a dog. Like, it would be the equivalent of somebody not just training and instructing their dog to bite somebody, but like cultivating a relationship with a dog over a period of years where they sort of have an implicit understanding with one another.
Right.
Then it becomes a much more difficult legal case. I have trouble just thinking about this because it's so complicated. I don't know about you. It's a very vexing problem.
Right. But that's what makes it so much fun.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. I tell you what, we're going to take a quick break here to hear a message from our sponsor, and then we will continue our conversation. We'll be right back.
The PC gave us computing power at home, the internet connected us, and mobile let us do it pretty much anywhere. Now generative AI lets us communicate with technology in our own language using our own senses. But figuring it all out when you're living through it is a totally different story. Welcome to Leading the Shift, a new podcast from Microsoft Azure. I'm your host, Susan Ettlinger. In each episode, leaders will share what they're learning to help you navigate all this change with confidence. Please join us. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And now a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud. Identity is the new battleground, and attackers are exploiting stolen identities to infiltrate your organization. Traditional defenses can't keep up. SpyCloud's holistic identity threat protection helps security teams uncover and automatically remediate hidden exposures across your users, from breaches, malware, and phishing to neutralize identity-based threats like account takeover, fraud, and ransomware. Don't let invisible threats compromise your business. Get your free corporate darknet exposure report at spycloud.com/cyberwire and see what attackers already know. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. All right, we are back, and my story this week actually just kind of rolls right into what we were just talking about. And this is a story from Wired, and it's titled, "Who's to Blame When AI Agents Screw Up?" And it's kind of extending the conversation that we've had, because I don't know if you've heard, Ben, but the new hotness when it comes to AI are AI agents, which are the LLMs extended to be able to do stuff for you.
Yep.
So I think probably a common example is going to your AI agent and saying, plan and book my vacation, right?
Yep.
And it'll go off and it'll know, and it knows what types of things you like to do and where you like to travel and what you don't like. And
another blow to the travel agent business right here.
Yeah, that's exactly what they need. So it comes back to you and it says, good news, I've booked you air travel, I've booked you hotel stays, I've booked you rental cars, I've booked you tours, all that kind of stuff on your behalf. I did all this. So away we go. Your vacation is completely planned. And that's the dream. Right? That's the thing we aspire to.
I'm sure it just always happens that way, right, Dave?
So this article is about what happens when you give an AI agentic authority and it screws up. So let's start with the example that I was just talking about. To ask it to book my vacation, I get to the airport, and the flight that I was booked on doesn't exist.
Yep.
Right? The AI completely created a flight that doesn't exist. It's got a flight number. It's got, I know people who are listening are going to say, well, then how did it pay for it? But let's just stay with me.
Yeah, and there's actually there's a real world example that we talked about on this podcast. Remember the Air Canada chatbot scenario where the Air Canada's chatbot hallucinated a bereavement policy that didn't actually exist?
Oh, right.
Yeah, and they were like, here's your reimbursement as part of our bereavement policy.
Right.
Which, of course, Air Canada didn't actually have, and it was a complete hallucination. Talk about a troubling use case for hallucinations. I think agents is certainly up there when we think about the downfalls of LLMs and hallucinations.
Well, and there's another one sort of coming from the other direction. I remember there was someone who was using a chatbot, like a customer service sales chatbot on a car dealership website, and got the chatbot to agree to legally binding language that they would sell him a Chevy Tahoe for $1. Right?
Whoops.
Yeah. And the guy was like, but he's like, you agreed that this is a contract, that this is legally binding, that you were representing the company. And the chatbot was like, yes, I agree. I represent it was that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the guy ended up with a Chevy Tahoe for $1, but it's an interesting use case. It's an interesting, not so hypothetical that actually happened. So I'm curious on your take here, looking through this article and the key points they make here. We know these AI agents are going to mess things up. And what does that mean for what we consider liability to be these days? Is this something where you get yourself, the insurance companies start selling AI agent liability policies?
I think they're going to have to. Otherwise, the companies are going to be sued. And this, again, is very similar to our last story here. But if you have an agent that messes up a significant number of times, and if you can establish damages, and they give really funny example in the story of somebody ordering onion rings, but it is interpreted by the agent as ordering extra onions. It gets lost in translation.
Right.
If you have like a 10% rate of these types of errors happening, then I think liability has to be imputed on the agent. That should be the incentive to get these companies to refine their systems so that when people are using them, they can have more confidence that they're not going to get these rather absurd results. What the companies can do is try and contract that away. Now, that's not going to be a foolproof solution, but they might have a provision saying by agreeing to use this agent, you are acknowledging that there's a significant rate of failure or of mistakes through the use of this agent chatbot.
Right.
And you are either willing to not hold us liable, or you agree to whatever type of arbitration is going to be favorable to the company. Meaning maybe somebody that the company has picked can adjudicate these cases to try and come up with an equitable solution.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the next step of what's going to happen. It seems like a good use for our legal system to catch these types of valid legal harms that emanate from the use of agents, so that the developers of the agents have more of an incentive to clean up their products. That's true for everything. I mean, there's a reason that we have strict product liability. It's that if you have a product that's defective for too many users, it's not financially feasible for every individual user to instigate a lawsuit against the company and try and go through discovery and figure out at which point in the manufacturing process was one individual employee negligent that allowed this to happen. Products, when they're put on the market, are expected to work because we're going to be relying on them. And I think eventually we're going to get to a place where that's completely true with these AI agents. If they're widely in use, then there's going to be an expectation, just like the producers of any other product, that this is a product that works consistently and isn't causing harm.
So let me extend my metaphor to the breaking point, which is
here we go again.
I'm off to do. Yes, it's my favorite thing. Let's say I hire a travel agent, right? Or let's say I hire a travel agency. So I'm hiring a company They assign a travel agent to me. That travel agent makes a colossal blunder. Say, same thing we envisioned before, right? The travel agent sends me information about my flight. Turns out the flight doesn't exist. Now, my normal next step would be to sue the travel agency, right? For screwing up my vacation, wasting my money. It seems to me like in today's world, the AI equivalent of that is the travel agency would have in their contract a line that says, sometimes travel agents make
We make mistakes.
or hallucinate. So you use our travel agents at your own risk. Now,
Yeah.
a travel agency who did that wouldn't stay in business very long. And I think people would probably still perhaps successfully sue them, you think?
And there's a limit to how much you can contract away. Like
Right.
if it's so
Okay.
haphazard that this continues to happen, the contract isn't going to completely get you out of it. And this is true for all different types of contracts. If it's legally recognizable risk, that's a normal risk attendant to that type of business, you can contract that away. But if you develop a chairlift at a ski resort where 1 out of every 6 chairs or whatever falls off and sends somebody to their death,
Right.
then no matter how many times you get the skier to sign the release form, like that's going to be an unacceptable practice.
Yeah.
So if we're relying on AI agents to perform more complex tasks that we're relying on to live our everyday lives, I think even with that type of contract language or mandatory arbitration, courts are still going to be willing to hold those AI agents and vicariously their developers to account in those circumstances.
So would you say that we are on an inevitable collision course between the companies who are making and implementing these AI agents and our legal system to work this stuff out?
I think so. I mean, there are a couple of ways you could potentially try to ameliorate this problem. One of them is having more human involvement in the process. So you hire the agent. The AI agent produces your travel itinerary. It sends it over to the human and says, do you want to check this? Do you want to verify it?
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of defeats the purpose of having an AI agent, doesn't it? Like, if I'm going to be involved as a human, why shouldn't I just make all of the arrangements myself? It's not actually saving me that much time if I have to double check the work of the AI agent.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I do think, like, if we're actually going to use these agents as they're designed, which is to limit human involvement to the greatest extent possible so that we can focus on whatever other brilliant things we're doing with our lives, then yeah, I do think we're kind of on a collision course here. I think we'll hit a breaking point where there are enough hallucinations or errors that lead to significant damages, that lead to lawsuits, and courts are going to start to hold these developers liable, and that'll have a big impact on the market one way or another.
And the
I don't see how we don't get there unless the developers get so good that they minimize the errors to such a significant extent that you have a 99.999% success rate, and there aren't the types of grounds for lawsuits that are going to be successful. But we're certainly not there yet, at least according to the evidence we've seen in this article and others.
Yeah. And it could just be worth it for the company. It'll either be worth it or it won't, right? In other words, it'll be worth it for the companies will get so good at it that the success rate is high enough that even if they have to pay out the times when it screws up, they're still so overwhelmingly profitable that it's worth it. Or
Right.
it won't be.
Right, exactly.
And they'll put guardrails on it that say, you'll ask it to plan your vacation itinerary, and it'll come back and say, no.
Yeah, I'm not going to.
I'm not going
I've
there.
gotten in trouble for doing this in the past. You are not going to get me to do this.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe at some point it is so profitable and becomes so ubiquitous that they're willing to accept whatever legal hits they get from people. If you have a 99.99% whatever success rate, maybe you just settle with the people who get hurt by it, give them a bunch of money, and trust that the rest of the system is working properly so that you can keep raking in the money. Maybe that's the other equilibrium here.
But it's interesting to me that in this case, the conversation you and I are having are that it's pretty clear that the company who runs the AI is responsible for the mistakes.
I think so. I think
different from the suicide.
Yes. I think that owes to the specific circumstances here. I think agents are given clearer instructions.
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, I don't even know how to really explain this or conceptualize it, but like there's a closer relationship between a human's decision-making and the output of the AI. Whereas it took months for that kid to develop a relationship with a chatbot on LLM, and the kid had as much of an influence on that chatbot as the original developer because the chatbot is reacting to that kid's personality and what that kid is telling it. So it's continually training itself through that relationship. I don't think that's quite analogous to what's happening here. I think this is more like traditional computing where you're giving it complicated instructions that involve human-type processing, but it's really kind of like if X, then X, if not X, then Y. Like multiply that by a million different decision points. Right. Does that make sense at all?
Yes, I do see, yes. I think there's definitely a distinction.
Where to draw that line, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, is it, how attenuated is attenuated? Like, where is the exact point where you can't hold the developer liable because the chatbot has evolved into something that the developer couldn't have possibly foreseen?
Right.
Is it a time period? Is it a number of conversations? I have no idea. I wouldn't even venture to guess.
Let me just go to a dark place briefly. Suppose one kid bullies another kid into committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
What's the legal peril of the bully kid and the bully kid's parents?
I mean, there's potentially a lawsuit there if it's directly traceable.
Is there a crime?
It is really circumstance dependent. In most contexts, I don't think it's like bullying itself in the absence of physical violence is probably not going to lead to criminal liability on the part of the person or the parents.
Okay.
If it's directly traceable, like you can prove that it was the bully's actions or the bully's words that led to the suicide, then I think you could have a lawsuit for wrongful death or intentional infliction of emotional distress. But that's going to be a really hard case to bring.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a good metaphor. I mean, I can see why it would be applicable in this case, where maybe it's a factor, maybe it's the overwhelming factor, but there are still cases where you're not going to hold that bully or that bully's parents liable, depending on what type of evidence you have that it was the bully's actions that weren't constitutionally protected free speech that led to what happened with the kid.
Well, that's where, does the bully have free speech protections, whereas the AI may not?
Yes. Now, not to get into, this is getting really in the weeds, but like public school students have a decreased level of First Amendment protection relative to adults.
Right.
Just because public schools have an interest in maintaining order, et cetera, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's not the equivalent free speech rights that any adult would have in being protected in what they say.
Sure.
And then certain types of speech doesn't fall under First Amendment protection at all. So true fighting words that lead to direct violence and altercation, any words that would immediately cause imminent lawless action, like that's not constitutionally protected speech. But a bully just saying mean things to a kid, that's going to be almost an impossible thing to prove.
Right. Subtle psychological manipulation.
Right.
Which is, I think, in the realm of what they're accusing the AI of having done.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the exact words that the AI said, it didn't explicitly say you should commit suicide now. I mean, it encouraged it in so many words.
Right.
Come home to me as soon as possible. But this is when the 14-year-old had prompted the AI saying that this is something that he had been thinking about.
I see.
So, I don't know. That is also a very difficult parallel.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you suppose, well, let me phrase it this way. What's our trajectory here? Is this, are we on a 10-year path? Are we on a 20-year path? Are we on a 1-year path for any of this being clarified?
I think we're on a shorter timeline in terms of actions that the companies are going to take themselves to try and avoid any legal liability.
So they foresee the potential here. And
totally.
Going to try to prevent it. Yeah, that makes sense.
And even to give them credit, I think they understand the moral dimension here. There are only so many of these types of stories that can be out there without there being a significant public outrage and increased demands on these companies to put up greater guardrails.
Yeah, that's fair.
And in this article, we've already seen that both of the companies that are named in the lawsuit relating to the 14-year-old have already taken actions to try and come up with a child-safe version of an LLM that has greater guardrails. And I think that's kind of the best thing for everyone. We don't have to deal with all of this litigation, but companies have been scared straight into putting up proper guardrails. My concern is that in other circumstances that maybe are a little bit more unclear, maybe even circumstances when children aren't involved, it would be so much more expensive and burdensome for the companies to make changes or put up guardrails for such a diffuse chance that there's going to be some legal harm, that somebody's going to take violent action against themselves or others as a result of what that chatbot has said, that they just might not bother with reining themselves in. And that's where I think governments have a role in forcing these companies to put on guardrails to prevent these types of things from happening. And I think we'll start to see more, specifically state legislation, where it imposes liability, or there might be an affirmative defense in cases like this if the developers of these chatbots put in place certain safeguards. We've seen that in the cybersecurity context, where companies have an affirmative defense against data breaches if they've taken certain cyber hygiene measures.
Right.
And so maybe we could see something similar in these types of cases.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's an interesting line of discussion, isn't it?
Can I also just say at the end of this article that we'll post in the show notes on the Washington Post, they put in, which I think should be put in any article about this, that if you or someone you know needs help, visit 988lifeline.org or call Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988.
Yeah.
I think it's an important reminder.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we will have a link to the stories in the show notes, and of course, we would love to hear from you. If you have some feedback or something you'd like us to consider for the show, you can email us. It's caveat@n2k.com. Hey everybody, Dave here. I've talked about Delete Me before, and I'm still using it because it still works. It's been a few months now, and I'm just as impressed today as I was when I signed up. Delete Me keeps finding and removing my personal information from data broker sites, and they keep me updated with detailed reports, so I know exactly what's been taken down. I'm genuinely relieved knowing my privacy isn't something I have to worry about every day. The Delete Me team handles everything. It's the set it and forget it peace of mind. And it's not just for individuals. Delete Me also offers solutions for businesses, helping companies protect their employees' personal information and reduce exposure to social engineering and phishing threats. And right now, our listeners get a special deal, 20% off your Delete Me plan. Just go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and use promo code N2K at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/N2K, code N2K. And that is Caveat, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. This episode is produced by Liz Stokes. Our executive producer is Jennifer Eiben. The show is mixed by Trey Hester. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening.